So welcome everyone. I'm Casper with AIR. Today we're hosting a webinar on SoundPath, and today's webinar is How's This Sound? A post-production feedback panel. If you're not familiar with AIR, we're a community of audio makers of all kinds, from public radio to podcasters to sound engineers and audio reporters. So I'll drop a link in the chat if you want to find out more information about AIR. And today's webinar, we're going to listen to a few pieces that were submitted by some of the attendees. And we have a panel of industry's best sound designers, mix engineers, and composers who will be giving feedback on the pieces. So it'll be a fun listening / interactive session. And we'll also be using a different software to listen to the pieces. And we'll drop the link in the chat when it's time for that. And this webinar is being recorded, so it'll be available to everyone who registered. There will be an email sent out afterwards, so if you can't stick around for the whole time, don't worry, you'll have access to that. And I will go ahead and pass it off to Erica, who will be taking the lead on today's session.
Hi everyone, thanks Casper. I'm Erica. I'm here with Good Studio presenting this webinar. Sort of the point of it was that I was talking with David Herman, who also works here at Good Studio, and we were talking about how there are so many wonderful spaces for talking about radio and podcasts and what we do, but not a lot that are focused on post-production, sound design, mix engineering. So we wanted to make a space to celebrate that and just talk about like the unique parts of making this work that are happening in post-production, often by one person making a lot of creative decisions and just like interfacing with a session and not having a lot of like direct creative feedback or input from other people who do the same thing that we do. What else to say? I'm a mix engineer. I work freelance on a lot of stuff. This week recently for Vox and Pushkin, and I've worked with all three of these wonderful panelists in various capacities and learned a lot from them as mixers. So yeah, I'll turn it over to each of them to introduce themselves and say a little bit about who they are and what they do in the post-production radio world. So I guess, Rob, if you want to start.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Byers. Been in the public radio space for a long time, and in the past few years, more in the podcast space as well. Worked at NPR, American Public Media, Vox Media, and I'm freelancing right now. I'm really enjoying that side of life. I'm really happy to be here, and Erica and David, thank you, as well as Casper and Air for putting this on. You've heard me say this, but this is such a great idea and such a unique space you've created. So thank you for doing this.
I'm Hannis. I'm a composer, sound designer, mixer. Originally come to this from more of a film scoring background, and since like 2015-ish, I've been making original music for podcasts, trying to make them feel like short films, basically. And I've been freelance since 2017. Worked with most of the people that make podcasts in the US, and as well as the BBC and CBC. And yeah, I'm also really glad to be here.
I'm Jeremy. Nice to see you all. I echo Rob's thanks to Erica and David and the Good Studio, which just in general has such a great community vibe. Podcasting is part of what I do, but not all of it. I think of myself as a sound designer, and mainly when it comes to podcasts and radio, I work on the show Radio Lab, where I'm one of the many people who contribute sound design to that show, and occasionally work on audio dramas for Audible, produced by the folks who make SNL. But outside of that, I also work in film and TV a ton, mainly documentaries, and I also work on a lot of immersive museum exhibits.
Cool, thank you all. Okay, so I'm gonna drop this link in the chat. Okay, and this is how we're going to be listening to the pieces that we'll be discussing today. So this is basically like a streaming link separate to Zoom where there's going to be a high quality audio stream because we're talking about mixing. We wanted to like do this as close to the original as possible. And David is going to be streaming down the line. So is anyone having any issues accessing this link? You can put it in the chat, or seems like it's working okay. Okay, not seeing anyone saying that they're having issues. If anything comes up, put it in the chat and I will like send it to you directly. Okay, so we're going to listen to 3 pieces today. Oh, where is the link? Okay, I think I may have just sent it to the panelists. Can everyone see the link now? Yes? Okay, great. Thank you, chat. I appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to listen to 3 pieces today. We had a number of people, great mixers, sound designers, submit pieces, and we chose these 3 because we thought that there were a number of different elements to talk through. They have some differences in style, and we are very grateful to have the 3 designers and mixers of these pieces here. So all of you can learn from them, hear a little bit about the pieces, like some of the thought that went into it, and then we'll hear from the panelists their feedback on the pieces and discuss. And at the end, there will be a Q&A if any of you have questions for the creators, for the panelists, about mixing in general, any of that kind of stuff. So the first piece that we're going to listen to is by Cameron Naylor. So we'll all listen via the streaming link together first, and then we'll invite Cameron on to talk a little bit about the piece and ask any questions. Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Cameron, for sending in that clip. If you are you on, Cameron, if you want to turn on your mic and video. Hi. Yeah, again, thank you so much for sharing. I really enjoyed this when I first listened to it. And I just wanted to open the floor to you if you have anything like specific that you want to share about it, the process, what you did for it, or anything you want feedback on in particular.
Yeah, I mean, the process, this was my first time sort of working with narrative audio. I'm the PhD researcher in the University of Manchester. So my main sort of area is experimental music and spatial audio. So this was the first sort of foray into podcasting with this sort of sound design and score. So that was quite I think the biggest challenge coming into it was actually balancing all of the elements, the sort of sound design, the backgrounds at the start, and then the sort of pacing and the music. It was really interesting to get into this project because it was over multiple months and revisions that we sort of worked this into the sort of draft that you see here. So yeah, I think the biggest question that I'd have is surrounding that sort of mixing and balance of the elements, because I found at quite a few points that things weren't sitting as I'd like them to. So I wonder what people's workflow is with that when you have that material, sort of finding the place for it.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I'll open up to panelists if you all want to respond to that directly.
I'd be happy to start. First of all, thank you. As I also really enjoyed listening to it. I think you did a really, really great job. Especially all the transitions feel really bold and punchy, and I think it's working super well. To address your question, it made me think of something that I haven't thought about in a long time, which is way back when I was in college, I took a bunch of music composition classes, and I remember one thing that really stuck with me, and it's something that I think your question made me think about it because I think it's something that I do all the time and don't think about, and you reminded me of it, which is I got really solid advice once that when you're writing a piece of music, a good mix is really contingent on a good orchestration. And I think that's something that you can pull out of a musical context and expand into the context of composing a whole audio piece like you have. And I would say that if there are moments when you find yourself challenged by balancing the elements and challenged by the levels of the music versus the dialogue versus the sound effects, you might want to think about the way in which they're orchestrated and the way in which each sound is introduced in a way that can be a kind of like interlocking puzzle. Because chances are, if you find yourself unhappy with the way that something's balanced, perhaps too many elements are being introduced at once, and our brain really can only process one thing at a time because we're used to stimuli. We're used to being in the forest of hearing a thing and being like, oh, what's that? Is that dangerous to me or not? And either deciding, yes, I have to run, or being like, oh, that's okay. And then our brains do the work of fading that to the background so we can focus on the next thing. So that's kind of a general philosophical answer, but that's where I would go. That said, I did think the mix, I didn't find the mix as you've presented it now to be particularly clashy or have balance issues personally.
Yeah, I thought it was really clear. I have to say, for all of the submissions, they all sound really good to me. So like any picking apart is just because I was specifically asked to pick apart. That makes sense. But I also really liked it. I didn't think of it until Jeremy just said it. I do think that maybe the introduction is a little there's actually so much going on that it becomes kind of monotonous. And I think that not only orchestrationally, but if you bring in layers a little bit more sparingly, it'll keep my interest a little bit more. I feel like it's all there. It's kind of just like sculpting out parts of it. And then I have to say, I listened to your full piece, and this was less of an issue in the full piece than in the smaller piece. But especially if you're new to this, I mean, there are like conventions that you get from pioneering shows like Radiolab that are like these kind of downbeat hits that sort of base with like the ambient echo, like ooze, do you know what I mean? And some of that feels a little bit expected to me, even though it sounds great. And I'd say especially if you're coming from experimental music, I can almost hear it being like a little less stylized in that way and a little bit weirder. Again, just kind of building on what you have, just to make it a little less expected. I actually was really relieved when we got past the intro, even though I liked listening to it. But once it opened up, like I liked the stereo ambi of the birds. I liked the dinner scene and everything. But I agree. I think that you did a really good job of also creating space in the other elements. So the voice sounded to me as if like it was sitting pretty naturally. Like I don't know if you were actively EQing it. Probably, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, sort of carving that space in the music and the sound design to just sort of sit the voice in the full piece. That was quite a focus because there are lots of different guests and sort of archival recordings. So that was quite an important point that I honed in on throughout the mix.
Totally. It sounds like it. It sounds great. So
Thank you.
Yeah, this is super fun. I want to listen to this series. I want to hit the subscribe button. Absolutely. So nice job, Cameron. And I'll echo what Hannis is saying about, this is one person's opinion, and we're here to provide critical feedback, but grain of salt with everything I say today. One person's opinion. I thought just overall, the balances, the mixing moves, it was all very smooth. It was all very much of a style. None of it called attention to itself for the most part, and I think that's really important. And in hearing you say that you're new to this part of the work, this style of work, is surprising to me. Really nice job. I would have expected, knowing that, I would have expected to have some things kind of jump out and really grab my attention. So this is great job, Cameron. Hannis, your comment about feeling relief at the end, really, that resonates with me. And I think part of it is the arrangement, like Jeremy's getting at, the pieces and where they are. For me, part of that relief, I'm only realizing that I felt that too, now that you've put words to it, Hannis, but part of that relief to me, I think, was also the treatment of the narration. I found the narration to be rather over compressed, to the point where I think it's actually impacting the narrator's delivery, the performance of the delivery. Um, uh, and I'd be interested to know what it would sound like if we backed off on that compression limiting just a little bit and opened it up. It may present you with some more arrangement issues and balance issues, but I think a combination of backing off on that a little bit, and maybe even doing a little more sculpting in the low mids, might help some of the sound effects pop a little bit, in that regard. But for me, that relief came when we opened up into that scene tape, and just dynamically there was a little bit more room there, for my ear. But again, I want to say, like, I want to listen to this. Really nice job.
But on the flip side, hearing that compression on the initial voice is very much of like it's referencing a style in a kind of tongue in cheek really well. So there, I think it's like used for creative effect super powerfully, and then you can set up a contrast afterwards.
Yeah, this was something with this mix that I wanted to like pose as a question to all of you, is about like I feel often in podcast and radio land, it's like there's a working in a style or in a genre or pointing to some other type of like media, where here it's like there's sort of a play on the like nature documentary, and then there's like we're in this like old film tape for a while. Just if there's anything that you all have to share about like thoughts around being in uh some different like scenic worlds that are all in different genres, and like how those connect to each other or like contrast each other specifically. Because this piece in particular, I felt like it was like we were in nature documentary, it's like spatialized, it's like immersive, and then we're in sort of the podcast land of VO and scoring, and then we're in archival tape land.
I think of it like windows, like any sound in the world or any music or any voice, you have the inherent sound of that voice or that sound. You have the sound of the sound, right? And then you have that sound as it's influenced by its environment. So that's a second window that we're kind of looking through that can affect the sound, whether it's interior or exterior, whether it's in a sparse forest or a valley or an open field or a cave. But then you even have another layer atop that, which is the technology by which that sound was captured, be it a magnetic wire recording, or a television, or a radio, or somebody next to you on the subway listening through their earbuds. And all those windows contribute to an aesthetic, and they have certain cultural references. So when I'm trying to think about, okay, I want to depict a nature documentary, the compression is a really good example. Like that is the window of technology that is true to that genre that's applied to the sound. And then I'm thinking about, okay, what perspective do I want my listener to be in? So one thing I actually was sort of like interested in, and it's a question I pose myself all the time, is when we're hearing the sound of the projector over the archival tape, that's not like there's nothing about the archival tape, or there's nothing about that old film that would ever include the sound of a projector within its soundtrack. So by including that, we're kind of zooming out, and now suddenly we're in the environment of the theater. And for me, if that's a deliberate choice that you want to make, I thought that you could further reinforce it by then mimicking the acoustics of a movie theater as well. Or you could go the opposite direction and say, okay, I want to embrace the sound of the medium, and we're in the movie, and hear the sound more of like the celluloid or something like that, but not necessarily the projector. And choosing one direction or the other and going all the way, I think could make that choice more definitive, if you will, of what world we're in when we're listening to that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And to that point, when you think about approaching that sort of window, the environment, and having, let's say, the voiceover situated within that, I think that a big part of the sort of heavy-handed compression is that I wanted the voice to be up and like front and center. That was a main concern of mine. So in EQing that as it would be in a movie theater, or adding the, like an impulse response, or emulating the acoustics, is going to pull that voice back. How would you sort of make it so that it still remains distinct, but within that space, if that makes sense?
I'll let these guys respond, but one idea is that you could introduce that aesthetic, and once it's established, you could subtly and subliminally pull away from that, because once it's established, we accept it as the listener in our brains, and it kind of gets, I think it kind of gets like encoded in our brain. And then if you sneak it away just for intelligibility purposes, in our minds, it will still be in that place.
Fantastic, thank you.
Jeremy, would that look like, apologies if you've said something similar already, but would that look like, like a short reflection or something, and then just
Yeah.
over time, I'm just dialing it back?
Yep.
Dialing the mix back. Yeah,
Yep.
okay. Yeah. Cameron, I think some of that too, to answer your questions, some of that too could just be in the delivery. And I kind of wonder if that narrator has already given us a lot of what's needed already just in their delivery alone. Um, uh, the compression really came to mind for me because I think it was impacting the quality of the voice beyond a style. Like we're about a step and a half past it being stylistic, and we're actually starting to degrade the quality of the voice just a little bit. A little distortion there in the mids maybe. So just backing off just a touch. Are we on this call going to notice it? Yeah. Would those outside the call notice it? Maybe not so much, and maybe it's of a time and it's really nailing it.
The secret is on the biggest movies that have the most, in a world style voiceover, it's entirely in the performance. And like often I've worked on movies where I'm shadowing the mixer, no compression, no EQ, nothing. It's entirely performance. That's it. In a good studio, of course.
I thought you were about to say the secret is like way more compression than we think. There's a Killer Beck album that came out a few years ago, and quick aside, at an AES conference, we got to hear just the stems of that album and just the individual tracks, and it is compressed all the heck. But it sounds amazing. It sounds beautiful. Sorry.
Great. We have like just a couple more minutes with this piece. So any last thoughts, reflections, anything else that anyone wants to share? I saw that there's one question in the chat about the compression, which I think Rob you covered. But yeah, anything else that anyone wants to share?
I felt like your transitions are so powerful. They feel like they propel us into a new space every time they happen. And then when the theme music reprises, I felt like it was suddenly like I was getting sucked back into a place I had already been. And I was wondering if maybe that moment would be served by a new piece of music now that we're in a new place. Like it felt like the story had moved forward, and then using that theme again kind of like pulled us back into intro land when I was really excited to move forward into the forest or the next space that we were in.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also, again, not so much in the shorter piece, but I love how you used ambi as like scotch tape or whatever throughout the piece. Like you have the ambi come up, come down. I'd say like I could even hear that just being way more gradual when it leaves. Like I noticed when it left. I was really happy to hear it arrive, but I kind of wanted to like not be aware when it left. It's literally just maybe dragging it out or changing the fade, but
Or there were also there were subtractive opportunities too, like in the story when we say when the narrator is like talking about, oh, we tune out sounds we hate, or I think there was another one too. Oh, or like when he's talking about how tech cuts us off and makes us feel isolated, like ideas like that are maybe opportunities to really, this is the opposite approach of what Hannis is saying, but really overtly pull back on density, you know.
I'll throw in one very, very tweaky comment. Again, grain of salt, Cameron. We've talked a lot about space and in various ways, and sort of maybe getting into space and staying there for a moment. The narration towards I think it's the very end. I heard this in headphones and then thought, wait a minute, is this actually happening? And opened it up in RX just to check. It's fading to digital black completely in between some clips, and I noticed it as a listener in headphones to the point where it kind of caught me off guard just a little bit. So you might consider keeping us in that studio space, even if it's just a little bit of, room tone down there at the bottom.
Fantastic. That's all, incredible food for thought. So I'm going to make some notes and reflections and go and edit. But thank you so much for listening, and your comments are invaluable.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you for sharing your work. Okay, we'll move to the next piece. And just so everyone knows, we're gonna take like a 5-minute break after this next piece and then do the last piece. So that'll be like halfway through. All right, the next piece is by Claire, and we have it at the same Audio Movers link. I'm gonna send it again in the chat just so it is readily accessible to everyone. All right. And I think we're good to play it down the line. David is DJing. Hi, Claire. Thank you so much for sending in your piece. I wanted to open the floor to you if you have anything to share about it, the process of making it, questions you have about it, any of that.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to be here. So this is an excerpt from a travel series. It started right at the end of the show intro where the travel journey starts, and then yeah, and the sound design is made from music and effects from sound libraries and also some on-site recordings that the host did while traveling. Some of the in-field recordings were sometimes not ideal due to the recording, whatever environment or techniques, whatever. But they were great starting points to kind of build some of these atmospheres from. I would love to hear from you guys, obviously any notes that you have and perspectives, but specifically what you think could deepen the listener's experience and like bringing them into that atmosphere. It was especially fun to make this because I was trying to like get into that place and imagine what I would be hearing wherever this person was traveling. But and I think of like elements that are conscious, like the listener is hearing consciously, and also elements that are more subconscious but really impact the experience that the listener is having. So yeah, whatever you guys think on ways to keep the listener's attention and bring them in more.
I mean, I liked it. It's fun to listen to. And I love like travel shows in general. I love Anthony Bourdain and things like this. I think I don't know the exact way to fix this. I'm curious what the other guys think. I think that there's like a separation. There's like the narration and then there are the other sounds underneath it. And I know it's too late to do this, but I was almost like I wish it was recorded like verite or something like you were in the car talking on a like there was a little bit more roughness to play up that. But I also totally get the challenges you're bringing up. I'm just saying that was my initial response. Um, just that they kind of live in a little bit different worlds. And I thought about with the music, like I like the cues. If you mess with the voice a little bit, maybe the music sometimes is like coming through the car radio or something, so it's not another super element, you know? Just make it all sit together. I will say the exception is like towards the end, I don't remember the line. It starts to sound really stylized before like the nylon string guitar comes back in, and I thought that was funny in a good way, and that separation worked really well there. Do you know what I'm talking about? Does it make sense?
Like I don't know which part you're talking about. Like going into where she steps.
I would say
where
like
she goes
right
into hike.
before you guys are walking at the end with the footsteps.
Okay.
There's like this moment where it becomes the whole thing seems to pull out to become almost like a TV looking in or like a and that worked better for me. I'm sorry I'm not articulating this very well, but
It's okay. I think
Yeah, I had a similar thought when you were like, oh, the recordings weren't ideal. In my mind, I'm like, ooh, how are they not ideal? Because maybe, like, I don't know if it's really rough and if it's like lots of handling noise or something like that, there's a way in which that might actually be some valuable texture and really like feeling like we're there. But of course, like I think you can obviously like with a travel show, the idea is to bring the listener to that environment. And so I feel there are kind of like two approaches if you wanted to take that to the next level. The one is like the long game where you like part of our job, I feel, as mixers and sound designers often is kind of being lifelong coaches and educators for the people that we work with about how they can use our craft to further what they're doing. And so there's the long game of coaching your host and being like, hey, like the next time you're in the car, like even if you're not talking, like run the recorder when you like start the car up and or pull into the next town or something like that. Or talk to it, or like those kinds of coaching things, or technical coaching of being like, hey, I noticed the last time there's a lot of wind noise on the recorder, so there's this like dead cat thing that you can buy, and that's going to help that, those kinds of things. So that there's the kind of long game. Then there's the kind of like not quite like the augmentation route. And I specifically really wanted to tell you about one resource that I really like and am drawn to, and it has really helped me out in a pinch when the goal is to bring the listener to a new place. And I think especially the movie I worked on that took place in North Korea, where like, of course, we're not going to like go to like a soundeffect.com and get the North Korea library or something like that. And there's the site, it's called aporee.com. It's a nonprofit, APOREE.org, sorry. And when you go to it, it looks like a big map, like Google Maps, and you can search for a location. And it's this community of people. I don't know who they are. Maybe some of the people in the audience contribute to it. My sense is it's not necessarily like people who are always engaged in sound, kind of like professionally necessarily. I think it's more like sort of enthusiasts, but all around the world there are these amazing recordings, and they're localized like to the GPS coordinates, and you can find really cool stuff on there. And a lot of it is public domain, and the majority of the stuff on there that isn't public domain is like attribution only. So as long as you credit the person who recorded it, you're free to use it. You have to be careful about looking at the licenses and making sure that's all kosher, but it's a really, really good resource. And I think, if you find yourself in a situation where it's like, oh, I don't have the endemic birds of this one valley in Peru or something like that, and go there, you might be surprised. Like there's a lot of great stuff there.
I love the idea. Again, like Hannah said, it's done, but I love the scene tape idea. Put a mic in the hand and talk to the mic. Jeremy and Hannis have covered that, but 100%.
If I could throw one other element out there, when I teach film students about sound, they're not sound people, they're film directors. I teach them about sound. And on the first day, we do a listening exercise that was pioneered by this soundscape guy. And one of the things that we do, we go to Washington Square Park in New York City, and we listen and we write down all the sounds that we can hear, but we divide them up into sounds that are sort of from the natural world, sounds that are from the human world, and sounds that are from the technological world. And that might be another helpful way to think about, okay, where are the layers that can contribute to the unique personality of each of these places? And specifically, I felt a real absence of the human inhabitants of these places. And obviously that's highly contingent on your host recording them, but I really wanted to hear the people who are there, not necessarily as like featured people talking, but the texture of them talking, or running down the street or whatever it might be.
It's the car horn in the background of the narration you're recording on the scene, kind of thing.
Wait, Rob and Jeremy, I'm curious what you guys think. Using what Claire already has, what would you do to the voice other than, I get like using impulse response to say like she's sitting in a car. I'm trying to think of how to do that without making it sound cheesy. Curious if you guys have thoughts on that.
I think your idea of using the music, like I had that thought too, of treating the music diegetically, diegetic being of the world of the story rather than superimposed upon it, would be the best way for sure. And I don't think I thought of the car radio, but I was thinking like, oh, maybe we hear this as a busker, or maybe we hear this as playing on a TV down the street, and it creates a good opportunity for transitions too, because it means that you can create some perspective as it kind of like fades into our presence. So like fades not necessarily in volume, but in distance, and then retreats to the background almost as if we're like walking by it, and it could help suggest a kind of progression through a space.
I had a question for you, Claire, about like what you got from the producer, because I feel like in times that I'm trying to sound design something and I'm feeling like I'm sort of laying in like sound effect, and I'm having trouble getting into the world, it's because I've been given host VO and a script that says like, we hear footsteps, we hear town, we hear car horn, and it's sort of laid out in this very like text first way. And then I feel like I fall into a certain amount of like literalism in terms of like, okay, like this is the progression in text of the like sound effects that they want, and I'll end up kind of like laying things in, and it won't feel like as cohesive. It'll feel like it's more of like a text piece that's being like uh added to or something. So I'm curious on your end, like what the relationship to the like producer and the host were in terms of what you're being given, like the direction around sound designing this.
Yeah, so the host slash producer, the same person, also, where obviously host was the traveler as well. And I was working directly with them to uh, basically create everything. And they were giving me like a script that also had some notes of sound design elements, but she really gave me room to kind of like create from that. I think she had some specific things that she wanted in there, but especially with the infield recordings, she would like layer them like throughout, and there were like, it doesn't show it in this recording, but there were a lot of like, she had a conversation with a taxi driver, and she had conversations with like people she was getting ice cream from and stuff like that. Um, but then she also had like, we have that like narrator element and like scripting element. So it's like, as everyone's been talking, it's kind of been a question in my mind of like, what is the, maybe getting into the like almost immersive experience versus the storytelling experience from like honestly like a podcasting perspective. It almost feels like it was like two differing perspectives kind of trying to like mesh almost, where there's a lot of uh like voiceover and like obviously the whole thing, she's like piecing together all the clips and sound design and transitions, but how do we make that more of an immersive experience rather than her just like telling a story and then going like in and out of it, if that makes sense.
I feel ya. So often, sometimes, like, we're bound by the constraints of the writing, and it can create challenges. So I don't have an answer for you, but I have been in your shoes.
When in the process did you come into the project?
So she basically pieced together, she gave me the whole script, and uh yeah, basically after she did scripting, and then she handed me all of the audio and stuff like that to piece together. Yeah. And I took it from there.
I mean, one thing, this is purely style. So we have a rule at Radiolab. It's one of the kind of like secrets of Radiolab, of its aesthetic, let's say, which is it's kind of like the audio corollary to showing, not telling, which is if we have narration describing a thing and if we have tape depicting that thing, we always, always, always lead with the sound of the thing before it's described. And that might be a helpful tool in doing the kind of interweaving that you're talking about, in that if you give the audience a chance to hear the sort of unique sounds of a place first and absorb it and be like, ooh, what's that? And then have her resolve. It's almost like a mini tension and release. It's like, oh, what's that? And then her description resolves it. It might at least carry through. Whereas, and I didn't necessarily hear this in the thing that you're talking about, but in thinking about your question, I'm thinking about it. Like sometimes when you have a narrator going, and then I took the bus, and then you hear the bus go vroom, and then I got off the bus, and you hear the doors go. Pff. It doesn't like it's a bit paint by numbers to the audience, and it doesn't give the audience a chance to build that picture in their mind first before it's kind of clarified. So that might be a helpful tool, in film, it's like a J cut where you hear the sound of a scene before the image cuts to it, and then you see it. It's the same idea.
Cool. We have like just a little bit of time left. If there's any last things people want to share about this piece, last thoughts and reflections.
I have a question for Rob, which is I get obsessed with de-essing whistles on a per S basis, and I don't know if that's like a weird pet peeve of mine. I watch TV and movies all the time, and people don't do that. But like I don't know if that's like a personal obsession or if that's something other people are doing. Like definitely if I were mixing this piece and I had the time, I would literally, just because I'm crazy, go through S by S with an EQ, with a destructive EQ, and make a really thin notch on the whistles that I'm hearing. But I don't know if that's a me thing or like a best practice.
Jeremy, I was opening up my mic at the same time to bring up this exact topic. It might be a you thing, that approach, Jeremy. But
Okay.
Clear, I'm hearing what Jeremy's hearing, like 8-9K, maybe a little closer to 9K. There's a pretty good peak there, whistle peak. And when I listened on speakers and headphones, it was really, really jumping out at me at every S. And I think, is it a fine-tuned de-esser? Is it manually going after it? Is it dynamic EQ? Just with a really narrow notch, something along with soothe, take your pick, but something in there to try to attack that. That it was on first listen, it was distracting to my ear. That really jumped out at me.
Yeah. If I could just say, like, I agree. I completely agree with you. I did this a while ago, and listening back to it also, I'm like, that could have been done better. There's always things you go back and listen to and you're like, but I did in the process.
Getting.
It was really, this was a pain point of this project with this particular speaker was the S's. I did dynamic EQ on the 8 to 9K range. I had like 2 de-essers on there. And the really like, they were already really SE, but some of them were so SE to the point that it was like there was a whistle. And so I would go into Isotope and like literally de-hum the notch right there. And I was like, yeah, it was a bit of a rushed series as well for the production. So if I had all the time in the world, I would have gone through. Honestly, I'm a little crazy like you, I think, Jeremy, is I would have gone through every single one and like gotten rid of that whistle. But yeah.
When I'll just throw out there when I don't have time to be my crazy self, I too am like always. I've never found the de-esser that I like, but I find that soothe, if you tweak it right, maybe gets the closest to those resonances. And then there's another tool it's weird to me because I don't understand how it works or what it does, because it's like a little black magic. It doesn't have like labels on what frequencies the knobs correspond to or anything like that. But a lot of people use it, and it's called SA2. And it's a emulation of an old hardware device that's used in TV. And I've been trying to get to know that a little bit better, but
Love that. Thank you for the recommendations.
I'd throw the Massey de-esser in that list. It's old.
Massey.
Yeah, it's old, but for like really like um, sniping at stuff like this, so to speak, it's really good for this narrow stuff. And Claire, you hit it on the head, right? Like, how much time do you have? Right? Yeah, I really try, like, we're in this environment where we're providing feedback, but when I listen, like, to other people's work, I really try not to be judgy because I have no clue what their time constraints were, what tools they had, all those kinds of things. So yeah, absolutely.
That makes me feel better about you listening to my mixes. So.
Well, all right. Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you, Claire, so much for your work. And we're gonna just take a brief break for people to like stretch and everything. I think we'll be back we'll give it like 5 minutes, so 6:37 we'll be back and we'll listen to our third piece before the Q&A. So stay on the line, take a stretch. I don't know, David, do you have any like music in this audio movers thing if you want to play a little intermission music, maybe? See if we can get that going. But yeah, I'll see you all back here at 6:37. Hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed your stretch break, and the music. Thank you all for sticking around. Yeah, nice fade, DJ David. Thanks. All right, so we're gonna listen to our third and final piece, and then after that we'll have an open Q&A, so you can send all of your questions or comments or all of those things in the chat. So our third piece is from Eli. So we'll play that down the line now. Let's turn it over to Eli. Thank you, Eli, so much for sending us in your piece. Yeah, any thoughts on it, questions?
Yeah, thanks so much for playing it. This has already been such a cool panel. It's really a privilege to be a part of it. And what little I do know about mixing, I've been taught by either Jeremy or Rob, so that's very cool to get even more feedback on what's come of it. Obviously, this piece is about the LA wildfires. It was for a show that I was trying to get off the ground earlier this year called Radio Pacific, which was essentially going to be a deep dive on a different topic in California each month. It was all me, so I was trying to figure out a way to make kind of more immersive narrative style treatments for the news, but that could be done by one person. So I started working on this in the days after the fire started. A friend of mine who was a firefighter who was from LA kind of put me on to the radio traffic, which I didn't even know. I mean, I knew about police scanners, but I'd never even thought about it for the fire department. And yeah, there was just so much tape in there that I felt like I could kind of create this whole world that, with the absence of what you were seeing, just kind of through the point of view of this radio and what the firefighters were saying to each other. Um, in terms of mix, listening back to it now, I would love to know how to make these radios a little bit more listenable. I mean, it is just so striking every time it comes in and out. Uh, Voice intelligibility, making sure everything sits together was a big challenge. And if you have any further tips for refining that. But then even more broadly, just I debated a lot about trying to put in more music. Like it felt kind of sparse at times. And so trying to figure out how to keep the tension building with sound design, if you saw any opportunities for that. Um, Maybe it could have also just been shorter, but that's always always part of it. Yeah, that's those are my thoughts listening back now. Very excited to hear what you have to say.
Either on first of all, this is gorgeous, and extremely impactful. And this, I don't often have this reaction to audio, but I'm glad the mic was off or the camera was off while we were listening. You got a little emotional listening to that. You did a great job of just letting the story tell itself. And I think you could push this even further and go fully non-narrated. Maybe until the last 30 seconds, when you kind of wrap things up. But I think it's there. Is there another clip or two that you need to fill in a gap here or there? But I'd be interested to hear what would happen if you took away that narration and let it stand on its own. It's beautiful. Jeremy, you were shaking your head, so let me step back.
Yeah, I have the exact same thought. And I was wondering, like, and I think this is doable, but like, I had the same thought. It's like almost there. And like, obviously there are some signposts that you're adding of like getting it, but I think that you could find tape that does that too. And I think if you found one source of tape that's a different texture than the radio, so maybe it's local newscasts.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's you hire an actor to read text message alerts that were coming to people's phone and treat it accordingly. Or maybe maybe it's one person's correspondences with their family, or it could be an infinite number of things, but like one other texture. And I think I would like stick to that one thing, so it's like a back and forth between the radio and those responses. I think they could convey the same information that you're conveying. Not that I don't like your voice. And then I was thinking about the intelligibility of the radio stuff a lot, because like on the one hand, it is those carrier signals, like the whistles, like that stuff, and some of the high end stuff is like not comfortable to listen to. But on the other hand, that is like intrinsic to that format. Like that is what makes the radio sound like what it is. So like at first I was like, oh, it's very easy to clean that out if you wanted to. And there's a world where you could even do something as simple as low passing everything such that it sounds a little more distant and it's like we're listening to it in memory and it's more comfortable to listen to. But I think there's another thing you could do, which is I think because those pitches are so defined and so musical, you could do any number of things. You could take the music, the score, you could even take the existing score that you're using and pitch shift it so that it's always consonant with those whistles. So those whistles are always in the key of the music. And then it might not still be comfortable to listen to, but it won't be quite as dissonant or jarring. You could go more experimental and make music from the whistles, and you could separate those out through let's say you could do something as simple as duplicating the track and EQing it so you just have those whistles or high passing it. You could do something as complicated as using a dehum plugin and reversing it to isolate them. And then you could process those through effects and make some really interesting experimental textures from them, interesting feedback, droney kinds of things. There's a world of options, I think, but I think there are lots of opportunities in there.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'd be curious, like, what you would say is the emotion that you wanted conveyed at the end of the piece. If it's sadness or disconnection or horror, or if it's any of those. I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the initial version of this piece was non-narrated, and it was just going to be a standalone thing. And then I needed to somehow shoehorn 50 additional minutes of like two-way interviews that actually conveyed real information onto it. So I kind of threw in all of the latest facts and figures to tee up the expert interview that comes after this. But um, I think what I was most struck by, and if I could kind of create it in its own freestanding form again, it would be actually the kind of the stoicness or the almost the flat affect of the first responders. It was interesting because my buddy who told me about this, he was like, I can't believe what they're saying on the radio. Like this shit is crazy. And then I listened and I was like, this is crazy. Like they're looking at, hundreds of homes burning and they sound very composed. And so it's actually that disconnect of like trying to find a way to, because at the time also we were just seeing these images on TV incessantly. So like juxtaposing the LA on fire with what actually sounds very, very placid in a way.
Cool. Okay, that's helpful. I do think that you accomplished that. I felt like a disconnection, and I was curious if that was what you're going for. I do think that what Jeremy's talking about, I wouldn't do it with all of it, but doing some of the high pass so that like things are like kind of muffled could like build with that in a cool way. The acoustic guitar at like, especially at like 3 minutes, was like kind of on the fence about whether that's the instrument I want or like, not that it's my choice. I'm just saying
Yeah.
it does like, it occupies a lot of the same space as the voice. So it was kind of taking me away from it. I also just, there's something, if you wanted to leave it, maybe like moving it a little to the left or right or washing it out a little bit. And I kind of want to hear a little bit more of the gravity of maybe some of those low drones you use elsewhere. Like just kind of like creeping up. So it's like your chest is kind of like there's something pressing on you, if that makes sense.
Totally.
But I do
think-
like that. It's interesting. I like that idea of that approach that you took of being kind of like disconnected and it's like the haze of watching through. It's a cool, it's not the obvious approach, which I appreciate.
And Eli, you brought up intelligibility, taking into account that disconnected feel. I wouldn't do it personally. I wouldn't do anything to that tape that takes away the hiss, hum, garbledness. I wouldn't touch any of that. It's so uncomfortable. I don't mean ear-wise. Well, we'll talk about that too, but it's just so unnatural and odd to listen to, and it paints its own picture of the distress of the moment and the emergency of the moment. I wouldn't do anything that removes that, and part of that is having to really lean in to understand some of what they're saying, right? That 2K carrier tone thing, I would 100% go after that, not to remove it, but just to bring it down in a level. You know, it could just be an EQ on those moments that just brings it down and makes it a little easier to hear. But Jeremy, you were going to say something too. Sorry.
Oh no. I wanted to address one other question that you had, Eli, which was about building momentum and that kind of thing. And so,
Yeah.
like, regardless of what you do with the carrier tones musically or not, and I shared Hannis's thoughts about the guitar, but I think there's also a version of this where conceptually the music can represent the fire. And I wanted to share something with you and everybody that I found just immensely helpful, and I just learned about it 5 years ago, and I think it's so cool. Which is, there's this guy, Michel Chaillon, who's a film theorist, he's the only one, as far as I know, who writes about sound design. And he references back to the musique concrète movement in France, where another guy named Pierre Schaeffer, I think, talked about that there are these three ways of listening. You can listen to a sound causally. That's the sound of a fire. That's the sound of an acoustic guitar. That's the sound of Eli's voice. Causal listening. You can listen to a sound semantically, what it means. I'm yelling, that means I'm upset. You hear a fire alarm, therefore there's a fire. That music is minor, and that means sad. And there are all sorts of faults with each of these ways of listening, right? And all sorts of caveats that I'm not going to get into. So we have causal listening, what causes the sound. We have semantic listening, essentially what the sound means or how it's encoded in our culture. And then we have reduced listening, which is like, these are the raw characteristics of the sound wave: the timbre, the volume, the density, the pitch, there's an infinite number of things, the dissonance or consonance of it, the envelope of it, like if it has a high attack or a low attack, like infinite number of the kind of words that we use as mixers all the time. The thing that I think is really cool, so let's say you're finding yourself in a situation where you've decided, okay, the concept is the music is going to represent the fire. You can do some kind of clever algebra where if you remove one of those categories and think about them, it can help you get there subconsciously. So what I mean by that is you would say, okay, fire, I'm going to get rid of the causal relationship of the fire. I'm not going to use recordings of fire. So we're throwing the causal part out of the window. What are the reduced characteristics of fire? And semantically, if we listen to it semantically, what's the reduced characteristics of a fire that's growing and growing and growing? Well, we think about the crackling sounds and the materials of the fire. I guess that's a kind of causal listening, but that influences the reduced qualities. We think about the depth of it and the bass characteristics of it and the kind of buffeting that it does. We think about how it occupies space. We think about all these reduced characteristics, and then we can do this algebra. We can say, okay, what musical instruments kind of share some of those reduced qualities? Maybe there are textural percussion elements that kind of are reminiscent of the crackle of a fire. Maybe there are low-end extended techniques that we can get from our friend who plays the upright bass that are kind of similar to the rumblings of a fire. Maybe there are the sound of like gases escaping. Maybe there are wind instruments that resemble that, and so on. And then we can sort of craft music that is abstractly related to what we're doing. It can change over time in the kinds of ways that we think about fire, but it's purely representational. And I realized once I read that, I realized, oh, that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years as a sound designer, is constantly free associating and making. I didn't have that vocabulary for it, but like that's what we do. And so that might be a way, if you have writer's block, to think about how the music might be representative.
I love that. That's so helpful. Thank you for sharing.
I had a question to pose about this piece, which is something that I feel like I'm thinking about a lot when I'm working on documentary pieces, which is like, is it important that all of the tape we hear is real? Like, does it do something to you as a listener to know that these are real tapes? Because I feel as sound designer, thinking as sound designers, it's like there's often a heightening or an association or a, like, what if we layer in this or this. So yeah, I had that question with this. I'm like, I think it's so like strong as you're listening to it to know that each of these things are like were happening, but like, is that important? And if so, how important? Like, does the listening experience, like, because there's this like imaginative realm, is it like, does it not cheapen it to bring in things that aren't like real? Yeah, that was my question I wanted to pose to all of you.
This is a conversation that I've had a lot over the years with my friend and my colleague, Dylan Keefe, who's the head of sound design at Radiolab. It's something that we think about on the show kind of constantly, which is, it's interesting because I feel like podcasts are one of the only places where sound designers have an opportunity to contribute to journalism. And although in one sense we're artists, we also need to take very seriously the kind of considerations of journalistic integrity, just like a reporter might. So like my personal sense, as influenced by those conversations, is yes, it's exceptionally important. Like we owe our audience authenticity, and at Radiolab, the way that we solve for that kind of problem when we don't have the tape of a specific historical incident where a plane has crashed, let's say, is we go entirely away from simulated depictions, entirely away from crash sounds and metal and that kind of thing, and represent it entirely sort of through the means that I was just talking about, entirely abstractly with music. And that's kind of the way that we feel we can give our audience an authentic experience, but also represent events where they know very clearly, okay, this obviously isn't the actual recording of that plane crashing because it's a bass drum hitting and an orchestra tremoloing or something like that, you know. So that's our cheat around it, if you will.
For me, it's dependent on the piece a lot. Like anything that is newsy, I only use the real sounds. But like right now, I'm working on kind of like a series about an artist where I'm doing world building, and then it's all synthetic. But I feel like for this piece, Eli should be using all real footage and not anything synthetic.
I agree. I agree with you both here. I feel like the reason I'm gonna overgeneralize here, but I feel comfortable in this sense doing this. I think if this piece had an emotional impact on you while you were listening to it, it's because you knew the outcome, right? And I think there's something there. I'm probably gonna bungle this connection a little bit, but the reality of the outcome of the fires is strongly linked to your reaction. And if you were to get to the end of the story or even through listening, get a sense that some of these sounds were constructed, manufactured, I think you'd feel cheated. And I think your emotional response would also get cheated and sort of undercut. Right. So I agree. I think in this instance, it's got to be real, all of it.
Great. Any last thoughts on mix, things that we want to say about the piece before we open Q&A time? Last things? No? Feeling good?
My only mixed note was the 2K tone. Be kind to your listener.
Thank you guys. This is super, super helpful.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much, Eli, for sharing your work. Yeah, thank you to all three of the people that presented today and to everybody else that sent in mixes. This was really wonderful, and we hope to keep doing this with theirs. If you sent in a mix and we didn't talk about it, we might talk about it at a future one of these. So we're going to open it up to Q&A if anyone wants to put their questions in the chat, or there's also this Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen that I think you should be able to see next to where there's you could see the chat and the whatever else react. If anybody has any questions or things that they want to share or things that they learned, or any resources, I see somebody mentioned archive.org in the chat, which is a great resource for archival tape. No questions or thoughts? Okay, so we have this question: for folks who've not had an education or background in music, is seeking a career in sound design basically a lost cause?
No, I know plenty of folks who are really talented mixers and sound designers who aren't musicians, but I do think people who even if they don't have a background in music, have a musical inclination, sometimes they have a little bit of a head start because they've already started to practice listening. Like as a musician, you're always listening to a band and splitting that out in your head to the different instruments. So musicians have a head start earlier in their life of practicing that kind of thing and giving a vocabulary to sounds. But certainly, I don't think it's a prerequisite. It's just that those people have more practice from earlier in their lives.
Well said.
I do think, though, I agree with Jeremy that you don't need to be a musician. I think that you kind of need to learn how to identify points of tension and release, and that's the most important thing. How to leave a phrase so that you feel like you're hanging versus leave a phrase so that you feel fulfilled. I don't think you need to be able to say that's a dominant tonic resolution, but I think just paying close attention to how different parts of how musical cadences end make you feel, if that makes sense. I'm teaching a class at NYU right now, and I try to make everyone think in terms of punctuation. When a piece of music ends, does it feel like a period or a comma or an ellipsis? And I think that that's just as valuable as knowing what you're calling the musical function.
Dancers know that really well too, in my experience, and some theater people, some, not all, some theatrical lighting designers really have that sense of rhythm and transition.
Pull that string a little further, to take it to a more slightly technical area. Jeremy said musicians had a little bit of a head start. Also in just recognizing tones and frequencies and being able to say, okay, that feels like 400 to me, that feels like 1,000 to me. And then pulling that even further, that gets into the arrangement of your sound effects and thinking in that way. And maybe that's what you were getting at, Jeremy, but what am I doing with my design down here versus up here, and where's the narration sitting in that, and how does all that interplay? I think it's important to think through that a musician would have perhaps a head start in.
Also, I think it's more fun to think of it as like collage art, a musical piece. When you open a Pro Tools session and you have these rhythm of actualities, whether you know what to call them or what the rhythm is, I think just thinking about that, and I think that, like what Rob is saying, there's a way in which you can train your ear, and there are a lot of good resources that are just actually even like the engineering community. People I know that are engineers are usually cool about talking about how they approach these things.
Great, we have a question here about the pacing of the pieces. The pacing was pretty different between the three examples. Do you have any thoughts on how the pacing of each might have heightened or hurt the story and sound design?
I think in Eli's piece, what we were picking up on, and it's effective because of his intentions in terms of what the emotional goals of the piece are. But there's an interesting tension in Eli's piece of music that's paced very slowly against tape that at times is paced very quickly, that creates its own. Yeah, there's an interesting thing going on there that I think is effective given what Eli's trying to do. There's another world where maybe if somebody were trying to build up pure chaos that is one notch less reflective or something like that, it wouldn't be the right choice. But that's one thing that I noticed that I think is interesting, which is to say that if you zoom out one level, it's like, okay, the different layers, sound effects, music, dialogue, narration, don't necessarily always need to be paced the same. And then you can zoom out one layer beyond that and say, okay, if the voice is contributing one thing to the story, it's already contributing that. Let's find a different thing for the music to do and a different thing for the sound design to do so that they come together as pieces of the whole to tell a story instead of just all saying the same thing at once.
Cool. I have a question here. What have you listened to recently that's inspired you or sounded new? I like that question.
I wonder what it says that it's taking us a while. Honestly, Eli's piece is standing out for me in this moment, as being inspiring.
I have two answers. One is I just started watching The Pit on HBO, which is a emergency room drama, and it manages the sound team on that show and especially and the Foley as well, or everybody. They manage to portray pure chaos constantly without any ounce of compromise of intelligibility or knowing what's going on, and finding that line is incredible. I think the mixes are incredible, and the Foley is so dense and so much work. I can't imagine how much work it was. So that's one answer. Another answer is I've had the opportunity to camp on the same piece of land for the last 5 years. and being in the same place and noticing how it sounds different over the seasons and over different times of day, and just being like, I travel plenty and record when I travel and that kind of thing, and I've heard all sorts of cool things, but being in one place and hearing how it sounds different over time has been a really inspiring experience for me.
Jeremy, I watched a lot of The Pit for various reasons on headphones, and I'm really glad that I did, because I actually found myself rewinding, like, what just happened back there, way back in the back? It was incredibly intentional, right? Highly recommend it.
Cool. I have another 2 questions here, I think. Wondering about the new modes of editing, such as Descript. Obviously, you can't do real sound design in it, but it can work for a first pass. What do you work in? And if you teach students, what do you teach them to work in? So I think it's kind of like a 2-part question. What do we think about new tech? I might open this up also to include things like maybe smart processing tools, or like our like ways of working recently, I guess. And then also the question of what we work in and what we teach on.
This conversation about to take a turn.
I despise Descript.
Yeah, me
I think
too.
a lot about how the painting that you make takes on the shape of the brush that you paint it with. And editing audio in text, I think, entirely undermines all the power that it has. And you miss out on so many opportunities when it comes to pacing, and so many opportunities when it comes to all the things about the story and emotion that the voice can convey beyond the words that it's actually saying. And then I'm in Pro Tools. I'm in Pro Tools 90% of the time, Ableton 10% of the time, SoundMiner every day, and Isotope every day. And one thing I will say, though, about the transcription stuff is Pro Tools has just introduced transcription, and I'm a bit more on board with that because it's so integrated with the audio editing, and it's a great way to find material that you need to find. So I find that that's different than Descript, because it's still very much an audio first mode of working.
I agree, Jeremy, and the transcription thing in Pro Tools is chef's kiss. Because gone are the days of like staring at a Google Doc and seeing a note in a Google Doc and trying to figure out where the heck that is in your Pro Tools session. You know, it's instantaneous now. It's really great. Descript's been around for what, almost 10 years now. And you can hear the change in the work. The pacing you're talking about, the edits, receiving content from producers that is just super tight and not respecting the breaths and the natural pacing of the speaker. I could go on and on and on, but I've been concerned about it, and I feel really concerned about it because now we're seeing shops that are Descript only, and it's not just an audio quality thing. I mean, it's a how you ingest the content, and we're losing meaning with some of it. The pauses, the paces, the ums, you know, that all carries meaning.
I totally agree with this. I would go off on it a lot. I'm always like sadly super impressed with producers that send me at this point now, because Descript has become so normal. If someone sends me something that isn't Descript, I'm just so happy, and I feel more collaborative when I get it. I mix podcasts in Pro Tools, and I would say I write a good amount of music in Pro Tools, and I also use Logic a lot. And Logic makes me think, I don't know exactly why this is, but it makes me think horizontally, where Pro Tools makes me think more vertically. And so sometimes if I get stuck on one, I'll just pivot programs. And that's like a way for me to keep myself out of my own like ruts.
Sorry, we were supposed to mention tools. Pro Tools mainly, Isotope less and less these days, except for spectral repair, really fine-tune stuff. And I find myself turning for that noise reduction kind of thing to a lot of the AI generative tools, Supertone Clear, DX Revive, those kinds of things. More and more recently. And Mac, I'm rereading your comment in the chat. I do agree, like Descript can be useful for a first pass. You know, you want to pull those big selects and find what you want to work with and not make fine editing, and that can work really well, but everyone's got to be on the same page about how it's going to be used in that workflow.
As for what I would recommend for students, it depends on the student and what they're doing. If the goal is to get a job at a big traditional shop, then or work with collaboratively with a medium to large team, then the answer is Pro Tools without a doubt. If somebody's working independently and they have the time to learn it and the right kind of brain for it, my understanding is that Reaper is 10 times more powerful than Pro Tools. And I wish I had time to learn it myself. Unfortunately, there are some bottlenecks when it comes to big workflows and big studios with big teams using Reaper. But if I were just a one-man band starting fresh, that's probably what I'd be using right now.
I have a sort of like follow-up question, not to stay on Descript for too long, but sort of a follow-up question for all of you about when you're getting sessions that are coming straight out of Descript, which I also like receive a lot of. I'm wondering how much like editorial you are doing, because I'm finding that more and more, like if an edit doesn't make sense, and I am like the person that is like really spending time and interfacing with the audio, like that I'm spending more time doing more actual like editorial mixing where I'm dragging out phrases, or I'm like, okay, this isn't actually the end of a sentence, like I'm gonna swap it for the end of this sentence, which means the same thing as maybe you were intending with the paper cut, but and then the question of if you're doing that, how much of it are you doing? Do you feel like it's an overstep of the like mixer line to be doing that? And how is it like received if you are doing some of that?
I don't think it's an overstep. I feel like that's sort of like part of I feel like it's part of my job to point out in the script when I'm mixing, like this edit just doesn't work, and dragging it out and stuff like that.
I find myself, well, I think it depends on the environment, the team I'm working with. In a news situation, I'm going with what's on the page because odds are there's been a lot of eyes on that already. And even to that degree, and if let's say it's a narrative, longer form kind of situation, I will probably find myself saying, okay, that edit's not working. Let me find an alternative. And I'll ask the question, do you see another way to make this, to cut this so we can achieve the same goal? Here's one suggestion, and I'll have that in my back pocket, like ready to rock. But usually there's enough to work on because of the limited time constraints that we often have, that I'll just move on to the next thing and put a marker there and move on and wait for the response to come back.
I think more I'm saying, I get what you're saying. I bring back a lot of stumbles and coughs and stuff like that. That stuff, like I don't necessarily search around for a different way to end the sentence. I'll just be like, I see why they wanted to take out the repeated, but it just sounds so much more natural, and I'll drag that out.
I'll mess with it. Luckily, but not on my own accord, just out of luck. I will say the culture in TV and film is the mixer. In TV and film, there's a difference between the mixer and the dialogue editor. The mixer would never ever touch anything like that at that stage of the game, unless it were like somebody over their shoulder telling them to. But the dialogue editor on a TV show is going through every alternate take and going phrase by phrase, sentence by sentence, word by word, phoneme by phoneme, looking through every single option, swapping things out constantly for the best possible performance. It's part of the gig.
Cool. Last two. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say too, Lorena, I would say most of the producers that I really like working with, I get like just a Pro Tools session. And I don't expect them to do all the same things I do, but I suppose I'm not a producer. And so I kind of rely on them to be the producer and do. Kind of losing my train of thought with this, but I usually just get like a Pro Tools session. I prefer, if I'm being hired to like sound design and mix it or write original music, then I'm kind of counting on whoever sent it to me to have already thought some about pacing and stuff like that. That may just be me, but usually that's like part of like even when I build into a contract and stuff.
Great. I think the last sort of question here, which maybe we can end on, is just like resources for sound designing and scoring, libraries to check out, any other like resources or websites or things that you'd want to share with people that are like starting out or trying to find libraries.
I'm pulling up my list. 1 second.
I mean, APM lets you audition this stuff for free, so that's kind of useful, I feel like. You have to pay for it when you use it, but in Blue Dot sessions, I guess I'm the wrong person to ask because I usually make my own stuff, but like, you can even mix the stems now on their site, which is pretty cool. It's worth looking into.
I would say that like I find that there is a little bit of a nuance gradient that happens where if you're asking for free material, there is actually like it's maybe not music, but like for sound effects and sound like ambiences and that kind of thing, there actually is good stuff out there on sites like freesound.org, on sites like Apori that I mentioned. There's one specific to birdsong called Xenocanto. But the trade-off is there are two trade-offs. One is you have to spend significantly more time crate digging and digging through all the crap that's on there to find the good stuff. And then the other caveat is like on a lot of those sites, there are like 17 different license types for each of the things. And if you're working for a client and you're concerned about liability and that kind of thing, I find like even having those sounds in my library makes me nervous because there are some where you have to credit the creator and there's some where like you can use it on non-commercial projects but not commercial projects, and there's some that are totally public domain and there's some that you can use but you can't change them. It just gets really complicated and keeping track of that is tough, so I get nervous about that. But at the same time, there are some real gems and sometimes I do need to turn to those sources. In terms of other sources for sound effects, I usually go to soundsnap.com for like a la carte. I just need one thing. Asoundeffect.com is a really good kind of source for boutique libraries. The BBC sound library is very dated sounding, but has now made itself available for educational use for free. And then there are some big sound effect libraries like Boom Library, Pro Sound Effects, Hollywood Edge. They're kind of like really good quality, but at the same time, because they're such good quality and a lot of studios have them, you start to like hear them on TV, so they're not necessarily the most unique. So And it's just a matter, honestly, the best thing I would say is recording your own always. It teaches you how to listen. You always find a use for it, even if it's years later. And I see that Alice asked about SoundMiner. SoundMiner is one of a few programs out there that's a database program to keep track of and store your sound effects and then search back for them. Other ones, there's one called Soundly that's a combination cloud library and sound effects database. There's one called Basehead that I don't use. There are a few others. There's a few new, really interesting emerging ones that allow you to search based on like actual characteristics of the sound that are determined algorithmically rather than metadata that you encode within the sound. Yeah.
You mentioned hearing, Hollywood Edge, those kinds of things. Mad Men, door closes. Straight out of Hollywood Edge. And I would say what Hannis and Jeremy have thrown out there is perfect. I would say like there's an art to once you find one of those libraries that you like, especially with music, APM, there's a real art to learning the search terms and trying to figure out how to navigate the tool that you've chosen. So if you're thinking about this, like don't overwhelm yourself with a whole bunch of them. Like get to know one pretty well.
I'll throw out one other music library, which is Marmoset Music. It's a bit more expensive than APM, but it's a B corporation, which I really like. So you can be sure that your money when you license a track is really going towards the composers themselves and the musicians who made the tracks. And all of these libraries are very flexible and have different pricing schemes if you're making an indie documentary versus a ad for Coca-Cola or something like that.
Great. Well, that is our time today. Thank you all so much for joining us for this event. It was wonderful, and thank you so much for our panelists for their time and expertise and the people that submitted mixes. And yeah, hopefully we get to do this again. I love hearing from other sound designers and mixers about our little corner of this world. So yeah, thank you all and have a good rest of your day. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.